February 25th, 2025. Well, big development here in a way. Dan Bongino is now going to become the deputy director of the FBI. How about that? And they thought they were going to bring in the head of the Secret Service. But anyhow, I think that's a kind of an interesting development. And of course, was a regular listener to his show, and of course, I've listened to the last one, I guess, today, the farewell show. So, anyhow, I wish him the best on that. It's going to hopefully it will get confirmed. I suppose he will. I mean, I don't think he'll be as controversial in some ways. I don't suspect as Kash Patel was, and Kash got in, and he's going to do a good job. And now I guess you can say that Dan can get into investigating those cases he's kind of interested in, like who planted those two bombs on January the 6th at the DNC and the RNC. Who was that mystery bomber, and why didn't they successfully find out who he was? But I think from that position, perhaps he can get to the bottom of it, as well as maybe getting those files out to find out what was going on in the two attempts against Trump during the election cycle too. That kid particularly, I think in Pennsylvania, I think he had some encrypted accounts, and it'd be interesting to know who he was really communicating with, and what was the content of those communications, whether it was assistance in what he was planning on doing, or encouragement, or was it totally irrelevant to his attempted criminal act there. So we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But anyway, I thought I'd kind of tag this one on that issue because there's a lot going on this week. And one big thing is the German election, which apparently the Alternative for Germany, of course, failed to get a majority. In fact, they came in second. The Christian Democratic Party / CSU, whatever it's called, over there they apparently refer to as the Union, which is the union of those two Christian Democratic Party movements, and they basically got the plurality of the vote, the most votes, and probably will be the ones that form the government. And I'm looking at the numbers, the way they broke out, seeing how that the CDU people, they don't want to deal with a party called the Left, which are really kind of the neo-Marxist over there, I guess. They kind of evolved out of the Communist Party of Eastern Germany, I think, but I think they've kind of not quite as extreme as the Honecker government. But at any rate, they don't want to deal with them, and nobody wants to deal with the Alternative for Germany party, which is kind of it's considered to be a far right party. Among other things, I think they want to get out of the EU and want to get out of maybe NATO, and they're kind of a Germany go it alone group. So they're definitely against all the immigration. So anyhow, that's a big development, and it will probably play into some of Trump's diplomatic issues. As on the one hand, apparently this new potential chancellor over there does want to provide these Taurus missiles to the Ukrainians, although I think they're usually launched from the Tornado aircraft, so I don't know whether they're adaptable to an F-16 or not. Well, maybe it can be adapted to the Su-24. At any rate, we don't know if that's going to actually happen or not, because the SPD was against it. And I think this may be one of those issues where individuals, members, may not be able to keep the bloc together, and maybe some of the other parties will vote against it. All the Greens might be for it. I don't know. This is, but this will be an interesting development to see. He's talking very hawkishly about Germany's got to develop its own military, and he's thinking that Europe together could have enough nuclear weapons to be a deterrent to the Russians and all that stuff. So we'll see where that goes. Could be in the dangerous zone, actually. But if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, and you can click the bell for notifications. Or if you prefer, you can follow me on Rumble, and the address for that is in the description below. So whichever. So anyway, so that's kind of that'll be a factor that will play into this. And of course, President Macron of France came and had a meeting with Trump, and so that you can see that Europe is pushing back against this, and they're still locked into this viewpoint that Biden was pushing quite a bit, that essentially tries to put all the blame on what's happening in Ukraine onto Russia, and doesn't see, and it seems to be taking the stance that Russia poses an ongoing threat to Europe, and and seems like their whole attitude is if there was a ceasefire and it breaks down, it would be Russia that would break it. I'm saying I'm not so sure about that. I mean, the Ukrainians are fully capable of doing radical things too. Not that Russia isn't. Russia could do it too, and that's why my perspective. I think that bringing European peacekeepers in from NATO countries is a bad idea. What I think could be done, and I think Russia might agree to, and I think Ukraine should be able to agree to, although they wouldn't like it as much because they really want to get us fighting Russia, I think. But if I think that Indian and Egyptian troops might be the pick. Reason why, they're relatively stable countries, they're pretty big countries, they both have large armies, so they could spare a few tens of thousands of troops each to go up and do that peacekeeping role. I suppose somebody would have to pay for it, but guess who that could be, huh? But at any rate, the point is that would be something that wouldn't provoke either side and would be more objective arbiters if anybody were to break the ceasefire, and I think that would be a good idea. Because essentially Egypt is probably more in the U.S. sphere of influence, if nothing else, because the aid we're giving them. And Egypt has had India's had a lot of weapons purchased from Russia. So I think that's kind of a balanced mix of 50-50. Anyway, but we'll see what happens. But that's that negotiation is ongoing. And of course, the Prime Minister of Britain is coming over too, and he will presumably also want to push back on Trump's plans. However, I mean, the thing that needs to be brought up particularly, and I hope that now that Trump's intelligence chiefs are now on the job, more or less, Gabbard and Radcliffe, is they really need to do and of course, in the DOD, of course, Hexeth, we need to go in and actually have a realistic evaluation of the prospect for Ukraine to actually win the war. A real assessment of the status of the war, what's really happened, not the propaganda lines we hear all the time, but the real truth. I mean, what is the realistic numbers for Ukrainian casualties in the war, both killed and wounded, and also for the Russians, and get a realistic look at the potential for any reasonable amount of aid that we would give the Ukraine to lead to a successful result. I think the answer would be very little chance. That more than likely it would just continue, that Ukraine would continue to lose if we continue the war. And otherwise, to have any positive result, it would have to be escalated, and that runs the risk of an uncontrolled escalation. So I think the best thing is what Trump is talking about, is to try and negotiate an end of the conflict. And I don't, if a successful end could be negotiated, I think it'd work out okay. But I think we're going to have a lot of trouble with Ukraine agreeing to that. I think we see that coming already. And, we have other issues that have come up. For instance, this whole thing about the rare earth elements. It turns out, I just saw an article on that in reality, there really aren't many rare earth elements in Ukraine, but there are a lot of what we call strategic materials. And these would include things like titanium and lithium and graphite, and of course they have an abundance of coal also. So, so the Volodar town was actually meant something like the gift of coal. I mean, but the problem I see at the moment, I don't know the whole story, but what I've seen, that most of the mining, I believe, was in the eastern part, which is pretty much under Russian control right now. So I don't know exactly how much the western part of Ukraine really has to offer, depending on when the war ends. I mean, I know that Pokrovsk area has a major mine that was one of the biggest mines in the country. If the Russians take that before the war ends, well, there's another one. So I don't know how that's going to all play out, but those are issues I think I do know are going to be real. And I don't know whether Western Ukraine has a lot of mining prospects or not. They certainly have a lot of agricultural prospects throughout the country. So, except that we got a lot of unexploited munitions and mines throughout the field. So it's kind of nasty right now. So at any rate, that's kind of the way things are developing at the moment. At any rate, I will try to attach a link to an article on the I've said about these materials that we were talking about, and we'll see whether or not they can negotiate a deal on. I guess the theory is that if the U.S. has an economic interest in these materials and the mining of them and so forth, with shared benefits to us and Ukraine, and then effectively that will be a sort of a security guarantee because it would be a direct attack on U.S. assets if the Russians were to resume the offensive. So I think that's essentially Trump's position. And the other thing he seems to be doing, which is interesting, it looks like he's talking about giving economic incentives to Russia. I mean, maybe instead of more sanctions, maybe they'll agree to something if they agree to remove sanctions and increase trade and so forth. So that'll be very controversial with a lot of people, though, and we'll see where that goes. It's interesting. And of course, the other thing I'd like to mention at the end of this here too is about DOGE and Elon Musk is continuing. I thought that was kind of interesting. This email that you have to say 5 things you did in the last week and send it back, or else you'll be terminated. Of course, to me, it should be fairly easy for these people to do this. I mean, after all, this is like your typical activity report you often have at work. At least there were periods of time when I was before I retired that there were how would I say some of the managers wanted these activity reports, and we would do these on a weekly basis. And it seemed like after a period of time, they would say, well, new manager comes in, we don't need to do that anymore. It's a waste of time. And so I guess he got tired of, compiling what he had to do to put up or whatever. So at any rate, but they could probably come up with 5 things, or if not, just make something up and use a lot of acronyms in them. And with millions a couple of million of these things coming in, how would anybody know anyhow, right? But the other factor on that that's starting to play into it too, it looks like that some of the department heads that have now been confirmed with the Senate are starting to exert themselves and say, no, just a second, Elon, we'll decide in our group which people get laid off. Not that, the president will give the quota how many we need to lay off, but we'll do the details, maybe, how it's being implemented. So I don't, it seems like so far Trump hasn't really taken a big position on that. He's encouraged the process, and then you have this ongoing set of court battles which hold up certain things for a period of time, and some of the judges kind of decided against the stays, and the other ones decided to to actually try to hold things up. Not a whole lot of, I think only one case reached the Supreme Court, and that was over the firing of the inspector generals, and they decided that they weren't going to rule on it until after the lower courts had processed it. So it looks like there's going to be a variety of snags in the process as it goes forward, but more or less I think it's going forward. So at any rate, that's about it for this one. I'll be post this on YouTube and Rumble as always, and the address of my social media accounts are in the description below, and so we'll be wrapping that up for this time.